Welcome to Dalet Amot shel Halacha. Ein lo lahakadosh baruch hu be'olamo ela arba'a amot shel Halacha bilvad. We are working in Siman Reish Ayin Aleph in Halacha Dalet. That's Siman 271 for Halacha number 4. Today, Be'ezrat Hashem, we're going to do a full review from the Sefer Halacha Birura by Rav David Yosef Shlita. For the first topic, we're going to speak about Isur Ti'imam Kodem HaKiddush B'Shabbat u'B'Yom Tov. The prohibition of tasting anything before Kiddush of Shabbat and Yom Tov. Asru Chachamim L'tom Kol Davar Ma'achal O Mashke Kodem Shekadesh Al HaKos. The rabbis of blessed memory, they forbade one to taste any type of food or to have any type of liquid prior to doing Kiddush on a cup of wine on Friday night, meaning on the night of Shabbat. Ve'asur l'shot afilu mayim kodem shikadesh al hakos. And it is forbidden to even drink water prior to doing Kiddush on a cup of wine. Two important halachot, Rabotai. We don't understand that once Shabbat kicks in, we'll see that there might be leniencies, but before that, halachically speaking, like we saw in the previous class, when we were learning the Shulchan Aruch itself with the Mishnah Berurah, halachically speaking, once sunset hits, one is not allowed to eat anything, one is not allowed to drink anything, even water, prior to doing Kiddush on a cup of wine. Vehu hadin, the same halacha is going to apply. Shasur letom kol davar machal mashke, vafilu mayim kodem hakiddush b'yom tov or kodem hakiddush b'shabbat shacharit. The same halacha is going to apply that it is forbidden for one to taste any food or drink any liquid, even water, prior to doing Kiddush even on Yom Tov. This halakha that we said for Shabbat is also applicable to Yom Tov. Or Kodem HaKiddush B'Shabbat Shacharit, or even Shabbat morning. So says Rav David Yosef Shlita, don't think that the halachot of Yom Tov are different than the halachot of Shabbat. Just like you are not allowed to go ahead and eat or drink on Friday night of Shabbat until you do Kiddush, so too you should know you're not allowed to go ahead and eat or drink also when it comes to the Yom Tov night until you do Kiddush. Or he says, even when it comes to Shabbat morning, you're not allowed to eat and drink anything until you do the Kiddush. Ulahalan Siman Reish Beitet, he says, if you look later on in his Sefer in Siman Reish Beitet, Yuvuar B'Harchava, it's explained at length. It explains at length the prohibition of tasting anything before Kiddush on Shacharit of Shabbat. Okay, Rabotai, Be'ezrat Hashem, when we're going to get there, we're going to deal with it. But if anybody wants to look into it, you guys can look into it. That's in Siman 289. So all we just set up to now, before we move on to the next subject, halachically speaking, one is not allowed to eat anything, one is not allowed to drink anything on Friday night, on Shabbat, or on Yom Tov night. Same is going to apply for Shabbat morning and the Yom Tov morning. One is not allowed to have anything unless he first does Kiddush. Umikol makom, nevertheless, imu tzameh biyoter. Here we go, Rabotai. We're going to see, like I said earlier, there are going to be some leniencies. If you are very thirsty, now everybody has to judge for himself, what does it mean to be thirsty? If a person is very thirsty to drink water, for example, you walk to a certain shul, you left your car at home, and you decided to go and you wanted to daven in a certain shul, by the time you got there, it was already after sunset. Now you want to drink. Are you allowed to drink? Yeah, you're allowed to drink because you're thirsty. You really need to drink. You walked a long journey. He says, "Yachol lahakel l'shtot achar shegiz zman ben hashmashot." You are able to be lenient and drink water after the time of ben hashmashot has arrived. Now, Rabotai, that sets a kochavim, not when the 3 stars came out. Let's say, for argument's sake, Rabotai, let's say Shabbat comes in at 8 o'clock. I'm not speaking about when you're doing the candle lighting. That is something else, Rabotai. That's 18 minutes prior. I'm speaking about, let's say, when Shabbat, when sunset hits. Let's say it's 8 o'clock. 15 minutes later is going to be when the 3 stars come out at 8:15. That's according to the Sephardim, at least. So now, Rabotai, when you're dealing with that time, it's literally 13 and a half seasonal minutes, we round it off to 15 minutes like we've been learning up to now. So, if you are in that time frame from 8 o'clock to 8:15 and you are very thirsty, you are allowed to go out and you are allowed to drink water. Ulam, however, he says, Ein la'akel bazeh ela ba'ofen shelo kibel alav Shabbat b'tzibur. Very important halacha. However, he says you should not be lenient in this halacha when it comes to drinking, only in a situation where you did not accept upon yourself Shabbat with the congregation. Like it's going to be explained later on, soon. As long as the time of sunset has arrived, even though you began eating in a permissible manner prior to then, you are obligated to stop immediately. You're not allowed to continue to eat or taste or drink even water until you do kiddush on a cup of wine. So says Rav David Yosef, let's say a person, here for example, I have this tea in front of me. Let's say I started drinking tea before 8 o'clock, 7:55. Right? I'm allowed to drink because it's still not sunset. Now sunset is 8 o'clock. So I would have thought to say, look, I began in a permissible way, or let's say I was eating something, so maybe I could continue. Says Rav David Yosef, no, you got to stop. I'm not allowed to drink, I'm not allowed to eat, I'm not allowed to taste anything until I do kiddush on a cup of wine. However, he says, V'kodem shkida hachama, but if it's before sunset, Rashai lechol o lishtot kol zman shelo kibel alav Shabbat b'tzibur. Rabotai, very important halacha. You are permitted to eat and drink as long as you did not accept upon yourself Shabbat with the congregation. Now, Rabotai, you have to remember sometimes, or maybe now, it's all the time since, in the summer the hours are longer, so Shabbat is later, so we start davening in shul 6:45. Some shul daven 7 o'clock, some shul daven 6:30. So that means once you already daven then, and we're going to see you said Bo'i Kala or Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbat, or even if you daven Aravit, any one of those 3 things, you're not going to be allowed to go ahead now and eat, drink, even water, even though it's still not sunset. So imagine like this. Let's say sunset is 8 p.m., but you went to a synagogue where they daven 6:30 p.m. You came out of shul 7:30 with mincha, Kabbalah Shabbat, Aravit, everything. So now you want to drink. You can't drink. Now you're not allowed to drink. This whole permission that we allowed you to drink after sunset, that as long as you did not accept Shabbat with the congregation. But once you accept the Shabbat with the congregation, you're no longer allowed to eat, drink, nothing until you do Kiddush. And that's what Rav David Yosef Shlita says right over here. Aval, however, im kibel alav Shabbat b'tzibur ba'amirat Bo'i Kala. However, if he accepted upon himself with the congregation by saying Bo'i Kala, or ba'amirat Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbat, or by saying the psalm of Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbat, or shitpalal Arvit Shel Shabbat, or you went and you davened the Aravit of Shabbat, says Rav David Yosef, Asur l'shtot afilu mayim. It is forbidden for you to drink even water. Va'afilu tzameh biyuter. Even if you are very thirsty. Va'afilu im higdim likabel Shabbat me'ba'od ayom gadol mishah plag mincha. Even if you went there and you accepted Shabbat upon yourself while it was still day outside, from plag mincha, still, Rabotai, we're going to tell you it is asur. What's the pishat? Like I explained, Shabbat still didn't come in. I accepted Shabbat after plag mincha. I daven mincha, Kabbalah Shabbat, Aravit, which I'm allowed to do. After plag mincha, you're allowed to accept Shabbat. But 1 second, but it's still not 8 o'clock. Why can't I drink? Because you accept the Shabbat. For you right now, it's as if it's night. So now you're not allowed to drink or eat or do anything until you go ahead and do Kiddush. However, says Rav David Yosef Shlita, Aval, however, Kodem Shikibel Shabbat, but prior to accepting Shabbat, Afilu Samach Mamash Lishkid Hakama, even if you're literally close to sunset, 7:59. 7:59 and 30 seconds. Mutar lechov l'shtot. If you know you're going to be able to drink in the next 30 seconds or eat something in the next 30 seconds to get a bite, says no problem, you're allowed to do so. Ve'en tzarich lahachmir bezeh hachal mechad shel kodem hashkiyah. You do not need to be stringent in this a half an hour prior to shkiyah. I'll explain to you what Rav David Yosef is telling us over here. In general, before you do mitzvot, for example, if a person has to go ahead and say Kriya Shema, I'm not speaking about davening Aravit right now, I'm just speaking about saying Kriya Shema of Aravit. If you have to say Kriya Shema of Aravit, let's say Tzed Kochavim is 8:15, half an hour before that you're not allowed to eat, meaning you're not allowed to have a bread meal. So let's say at 7:45, from 7:45 to 8:15, you're not allowed to have a bread meal. Again, we went over these halachot in the previous classes, unless you make an alarm, or you're going to have somebody else remind you, right? Or you have a set time where you're going to daven Aravit, whatever, but I'm not going to get into all those laws. But all I'm just trying to tell you, don't think you have to apply that half an hour stringency even by Shabbat before sunset. So you would have thought to say, just like it's applicable by other places, that you have to wait a half an hour prior, meaning you can have nothing, you can't eat a bread meal. So maybe over here by Shabbat, let's apply that half an hour rule. Says Rav David Yosef, no, you're allowed to eat literally close to sunset. And you do not need to be stringent with this by waiting 30 minutes prior to sunset. Rabotai, what about a woman? What about a woman if she went ahead and she lit the candles of Shabbat? We know, by the way, remember, women, the Sephardi women, they do not accept Shabbat by lighting candles. They do not. Ashkenazi women do, but Sephardi women, they do not. So a woman can light the candles, she can continue cooking. What's the big deal? She still didn't accept Shabbat. So therefore, Rabbi, we want to see right now, if a woman lit the candles, now she wants to eat, now she wants to drink, is she allowed to do so? Says Rav David Yosef Shlita, Isha shidlika nerot Shabbat. If a woman lit the Shabbat candles, leminhag Sephardim ve'edud HaMizrach, according to the custom of the Sephardim and the Edud HaMizrach, muteret letom divrei machal o mashke achar hadlakat hanirot kodem shkid hachamam. She is allowed to taste, meaning she's allowed to eat food, she's allowed to drink liquids after the lighting candles prior to sunset. Says Chacham Ovadia, as long, not Chacham Ovadia, Michila, says Rav David Yosef Shlita, who was the son of Chacham Ovadia, says Rav David Yosef Shlita, that if you went ahead, if a woman went ahead and she lit the candles prior to sunset, like they do today, 80 minutes, 20 minutes, some women do 30 minutes prior, no problem. If she went and she lit the candles, she is still allowed to eat, drink until sunset. But remember, Rabotai, sunset is the cutoff point when it's no longer allowed to eat or drink unless you are very, very thirsty. Then you have those 13 and a half minutes, basically 15 minutes, that you're allowed to go ahead and drink water, like we explained earlier. So says Rav David Yosef Shlita, ורק אם בדעתה לקבל את השבת בהדלקת הנרות. אסור לטוב אחר שהדליקה נרות שבת. And only if in her mind she accepted Shabbat by lighting the candles, meaning through the lighting of the candles, she wants the Shabbat to fall on her. She wants to do nothing, no more malacha, no problem. In that situation, she's going to say, it is forbidden for her to taste anything after she lit the candles of Shabbat. So we have over here two cases. If a woman lights the candles, since by Sephardim and Eidul Mizrach, we don't accept Shabbat by lighting the candles, good, as long as it's before sunset, she's going to be allowed to eat, she's going to be allowed to drink, because she still didn't accept Shabbat. But what happens if this woman, she wants to add to Shabbat, she loves Shabbat, so she accepted Shabbat upon herself immediately with the lighting of the candles. So we're going to tell her over here, she's not allowed to eat and she's not allowed to drink. V'chen ish, and so to a man, she kibel alav Shabbat mebe'od yom. If you have a guy that accepted upon himself Shabbat while it was day, asur l'tom davar machal la'achar miken. It is forbidden for him to taste food afterwards. Once a guy accepts Shabbat, he's not allowed to have food afterwards, even though it's before sunset. Nevertheless, he says, if you have a woman who accepted Shabbat by the lighting of the candles, and so too if you have a man that accepted Shabbat, like we said earlier, but if they are very thirsty to drink water, they are allowed to go out and drink water. Same halacha is going to apply to tea or coffee. Let's say she wants to have coffee. She wants to have tea, no problem. When it comes in regards to the halachot of Shabbat, we're going to tell you they're allowed to go ahead and drink the tea and coffee because we look at it also like water. So basically, Rav David Yosef Shaltai is telling us like this, that if they accepted Shabbat individually, not with the tzibur, not with the congregation, because remember, accepting Shabbat with the congregation, it's done, finished. There's nothing more to talk about. You can eat, you can drink until you do Kiddush. But if they accepted Shabbat individually, like a woman by lighting the candles, or a guy, he said, verbally said, or he thought, I want to accept Shabbat. Over there, we're going to tell them that they're not allowed to eat anything. They're also not allowed to drink anything because they already accepted Shabbat. But what? Says Rav David Yosef, but if they're very thirsty to drink, they're going to be allowed to drink. They're going to have this whole time, all the way up until either they go back to shul and they accept Shabbat, meaning with Boi Kala, or with Mizmor Shil Yom HaShabbat, or with Aravit, or once Tzedz Kochavim comes out. So they're going to be able to use the twilight period to their advantage if they're very, very thirsty. Now Rav David Yosef Shlita is going to speak about the custom of the Ashkenazim. According to the custom of the Ashkenazim, it is forbidden for a woman to taste anything after she lit the Shabbat candles. Why? Because according to the Ashkenazim, lighting the candles is considered like accepting Shabbat. Even if she didn't say it openly, just by lighting alone, they automatically accept Shabbat. But by a woman, by a Sephardic woman, they don't accept Shabbat by lighting the candles unless they say it openly that they want to accept Shabbat with the lighting of the candles. And nevertheless, even according to the custom of the Ashkenazim, let's say this woman, she's thirsty for water, to drink water, and she already lit the Shabbat candles. That means for her Shabbat came in. She's able to be lenient and drink the water. And even according to the custom of the Ashkenazim, if close to the lighting of the candle, she senses an urge or a need to eat something like a food, and the fact that the time of the lighting of the candles came, and she's not going to be able to taste anything prior to then, no problem. What is she able to do? Titaneh beferush, let her make a condition, let her openly make this condition. She'ena mikabelet alechet Shabbat b'hadlakot hanerot. She does not accept upon herself with the lighting of the candles Shabbat. And afterwards she's allowed to go ahead and snack on whatever she wanted to eat. So says Rav David Yosef Shlita, even according to the Ashkenazim, that accept the Shabbat with the candle lighting, but if the time of the candle lighting came and she wants to eat, we're going to tell no problem. Go ahead, make a condition that you don't accept the Shabbat with the lighting of the candles. Afterwards, light the candles and then go ahead and eat. Again, remember, Rabotai, all this is before sunset, because the lighting of the candles happens 18 minutes or 20 minutes before sunset. Now we are moving on to the next topic. Bliat turufa imayim kodma kiddush. What about swallowing medication with water prior to kiddush? A person has a headache, or he has to take antibiotics, and he started taking the antibiotics, say, before Shabbat. Because on Shabbat, you're not allowed to begin. Let's say he started before Shabbat. So is he allowed to use a little bit of water to wash down the tablet prior to Kiddush? Says Rav David Yosef, Mutar levlo terufa kodem HaKiddush. It is permissible for one to swallow the medication prior to Kiddush, בתוספת מעט מים כדי להקל את בליעת התרופה. With addition, with a little bit of water in order to make it easier for the medication to go down. כל שקשה להמתין עד אחרי קידוש. If it's hard for you to wait until after Kiddush, then you're allowed to go ahead and you're allowed to swallow the medication with a little bit of water. But if you could wait until after Kiddush, preferably wait until after Kiddush. Next topic. Shtifat apeh kodem Kiddush. Is one allowed to wash his mouth before Kiddush? Says Rav David Yosef Shlita, Mutar lishtov et piv b'mayim kodem Kiddush. One is allowed to wash his mouth with water prior to Kiddush. Next topic. Achilat ketanim kodem Kiddush. What about feeding small children prior to Kiddush? Do they also have to be concerned? Do we have to educate them? What's the age if we have to? Says Rav David Yosef, Mutar leted leketanim lechol kodem Kiddush. It is permissible to give children, small children, to eat prior to Kiddush. Va'afilu kodem Kiddush belo Shabbat, even before the Kiddush of Friday night. Va'afilu higiu legil chinuch, even if they reach the age of chinuch, of education. Ubavad sheyesh torach bedavar, as long as there is a need. Ukegonen, for example, sha'akatanim re'evim o tzibiim, if the children, they're hungry or they're thirsty. Ubnei habayit tzrichim lamtim zman misyom ad she'ikdushu alakos, and the family members, I guess they're waiting for somebody, or they're waiting for a certain time until they're going to be able to do Kiddush. And the minors and the children are not able to do Kiddush by themselves. So then we're going to tell you, in that situation, you're allowed to go ahead and you're allowed to feed small children or give them water to drink or whatever they want to go ahead and drink. Nevertheless, he says, bar mitzvah. But if they are already close to the age of bar mitzvah, it is correct, it is proper to accustom them not to eat anything, not to drink anything before Kiddush. And so too, one should be stringent. You should not give your children sweet food, junk food. If they're hungry, you should not give them junk food on Friday night before Kiddush. You should be stringent in that. Only foods, only foods what the body needs, not junk food. If they're very small children, ve'enam mivinim inyan haKiddush klal, and they don't understand nothing about the Kiddush, yesh lakel abazeh, you're allowed to even be lenient with junk food with them. Rabotai, I don't know why in the world would people want to feed their kids junk food, but he says over here, you are allowed to go ahead and you're allowed to do so on Friday night before Kiddush. Now, Rabotai, we're going to speak about the next subject. Shtiya b'shacharit l'mi shelo kiddush b'layla. Is one allowed to drink in the morning, Shabbos morning, if he did not do Kiddush at night? Says Rav David Yosef, Lehalan b'Shulchan Aruch Siman Reish Peitet Sif Aleph Ba'er. Later on in the Shulchan Aruch in Siman 289 in Halacha Aleph, it's going to be explained. Shemutar lishtot mayim kodem tefillah shacharit b'Shabbat b'boker. That one is allowed to drink water prior to the morning prayer of shacharit on Shabbat morning. Why? Mipanei, because she calls man shelo yitpalel adayin, as long as one still did not pray shacharit, meaning the Shemona Esrei, lo chala alav chovat kiddush shel shacharit. The obligation of saying kiddush of the morning of Shabbat did not take effect. So therefore you are allowed to go ahead and you're allowed to drink water. V'dino kidin shar yimot hachol. This halacha of Shabbat morning drinking water before praying is like the law of the weekday. Shemutar l'shod mayim, where you are allowed to drink water before davening. V'chein kafeh o teh kodem tefillah shacharit. And so too you're allowed to have coffee and you're allowed to have tea prior to the morning prayer. V'ayin pratei adinim bezel le'el b'halacha b'roa siman peitet siv chav gimel. It says look above into all of the details of this halacha, above in the halacha b'roa in Siman 89, in Halacha 23. Va'afilu im machmat siba kolshi lo kiddush belel Shabbat. And even for whatever reason, you were not able to do kiddush on Friday night, ukigon, and for example, shelo haya lo yain o pad lekadesh alhem. You didn't have wine, and you did not have bread to do kiddush on them. Rashai lishtot mayim o kafeh o teh kodem tefillah shacharit shel Shabbat. You are allowed to drink water, coffee, or tea prior to the morning prayer of Shabbat. Next subject. Kiddush v'sudah Shabbat kodem arvit. Now we're going to speak about, is one allowed to do Kiddush and is one allowed to have his Friday night meal of Shabbat prior davening the Arvit prayer? Says Rav David Yosef Shlita, even though it is permissible according to the letter of the law, lekadesh, to do kiddush, ulisot sudat Shabbat, and to have a Shabbat meal, kodem shitpalel tifilat arvit shalel Shabbat, before you have prayed the evening prayer of Shabbat, as long as you began a half an hour prior to Tzedek Kochavim, meaning prior to the 3 stars coming out, it's about 50 minutes before sunset. Now, if you guys remember, this is what we start speaking about in the beginning. If Rabotai, sunset is 8 o'clock, let's say 8:15 is when the 3 stars come out. Since there's an obligation to say Shema from the Torah, a half an hour before, you're never allowed to begin a bread meal. That's why it says Rav David Yosef Shlita, if you want to go ahead and you want to begin a bread meal on Friday night, you have to make sure it's a half an hour before the 3 stars come out. But 50 minutes before sunset, right? Because very simple. If 8 o'clock is sunset, 8:15 is when the 3 stars come out. Go back 15 minutes, it's going to be 7:45. So from 7:45 to 8:15 is 30 minutes. From 7:45 till 8 is 15 minutes. And that's what he's telling us over here. And provided that you begin this bread meal a half an hour prior to the 3 stars coming out. Dahainu, which means to say, which is about 15 minutes before sunset. So we see that according to the letter of the law, one is allowed to do Kiddush, One is allowed to start his Friday night meal before even davening Arevit. But what? We want you to start it a half an hour before the stars come out. Nevertheless, says Chacham Rav David Yosef Shlita, Mikol Makom, Im Efshar Hadavar, if it's possible, if the thing is possible, Nachon Yoter, it is more correct. Sheikabel Shabbat, it is more correct to go ahead and accept Shabbat first. Vidpalel Tefilat Arvit, and then go ahead and daven the evening prayer of Shabbat. Kodem Sheikades Al Kos, before you're going to do Kiddush on a cup of wine. So Rav David Yosef tells us, even though according to the letter of the law, you're allowed to do Kiddush, you're allowed to have your meal, and then you're allowed to go ahead and you're allowed to daven Arvit. Nevertheless, he says it is more correct that you accept Shabbat, pray Arvit, before doing Kiddush. That is the preferable method. However, it says Rav David Yosef Shlita, V'im nimtza b'makom, if you are found in a place, Sha'atzibur mitpalalim Arvit mukdam, you are found in a place where the congregation, they're davening Arvit very early. V'lo yimatzeh minyan litpalal achar hasuda, you're not going to be able to find a minyan after the meal. Yesh lahachmir sheyomar seder kabbalah Shabbat vitpalal Arvit im hatzibur techila. You should be stringent to say the order of the acceptance of Shabbat and then pray Arvit with the congregation first. However, he says, what happens if it's just the opposite? What happens if it's just the opposite? You have a congregation that they daven very late. But you're not able to find an earlier minyan. And it's hard for you to wait until after tefillah. You are allowed to rely on the lenient opinions that allow you to eat prior to davening the prayer of Shabbat of Arvit. Same concept. And provided that you begin to eat a half an hour prior to the stars coming out. Now about that, we're going to move on to the next topic in regards to what happens if I am in the middle of my bread meal, or I'm in the middle of having a drink, and the sun set. Do I have to stop? If the sun set while he was in the middle of a bread meal. If a person began his meal, we're not speaking about Rabotai that you accept the Shabbat, regular. Say you wanted to have pizza. I don't know, you wanted to have, a sandwich. We're not speaking about Shabbat. Regular on Friday afternoon, you were having a nice bread meal. If you began having a bread meal during the day, and in the middle of your bread meal, the sun set. You need to interrupt your meal. You have to go ahead and you have to cover the bread with a covering. And you have to go ahead and you have to do the kiddush on a cup of wine. However, he says, it is not proper to begin having one's meal on Friday afternoon close to the coming in of Shabbat. That you should do, Rabotai. And so too, that is the custom of the Jewish people in all the places, not to eat a bread meal after chatzot, after midday. And it's a mitzvah to refrain from having a bread meal on Friday, meaning on Erev Shabbat, from 3 hours prior to Shkia, before sunset. So in our case, if sunset is 8 o'clock, go back, Rabotai, 3 hours till 5 o'clock. From 5 to 8 o'clock, there is a mitzvah to refrain from not having a bread meal in that time. And sometimes on Friday, when you are establishing a bread meal, there could also be a Isser according to the letter of the law. Like he says, it's explained in the Sefer, in Siman Reish Memtet, in Halacha Hey, and on. And nevertheless, nevertheless, he says sometimes it's permissible to establish a meal on Friday after midday. Kigon, for example, he says, Bepurim. What happens if Purim fell out on Friday? And the Purim feast continued until the evening, meaning until sunset. So what happens if Yom Tov fell out on a Friday? And they postponed eating their Sudat Yom Tov until after midday. And now the meal continued until sunset. Or what happens if Yom Tov falls out on Motzei Shabbat? And now you had the third meal on Shabbat, which continued until sunset. Again, Ad Erev literally means until the evening. But I'm saying until sunset because that's where you have to stop. Like it's explained over there in Halacha Berurah, in Halacha Ted and on. And nevertheless, lechatchila ideally, yesh leizaher av bepurim ubiyom tov. One should try to be careful even on Purim and Yom Tov, shechalu biyom shishi, that fell out on a Friday, lagdima suda ad kama shefshar, to go ahead and try to make the meal as early as possible, to try to be able to come into Shabbat with an appetite. Even though these things are a mitzvah, listen, Yom Tov is a mitzvah to eat, Purim there's a mitzvah, but try to go ahead and try to bring the meal as close as possible to the afternoon, so this way when you're coming into Shabbat, you're going to have an appetite. If prior to sunset you were drinking wine in the middle of your bread meal, because what do we say? Once sunset hits, you have to stop. You have to take like a covering for the bread. You have to cover the bread. You have to do kiddush. So he says, if in that bread meal you had wine, that means if you had wine, that means you had to say the blessing of Borei Pri Gefen. So says Rav David Yosef Shlita, if prior to sunset you were drinking wine in the middle of your bread meal, now, when you are blessing on the cup of wine, when you're going to do the kiddush on the cup of wine, do not say the blessing of Borei Pri Gefen. You're only going to say the kiddush blessing. You're not going to say the Borei Pri Gefen blessing because you already said Borei Pri Gefen when you started before sunset. And so if you were in the middle of a bread meal, now you want to continue eating the bread after the meal. Do not go back and bless Amot shel on the bread. Nevertheless, if there's somebody that did not eat with you prior to sunset, in order to come out of this doubt, it is better that that person do kiddush. And let him also bless the blessing of Borei Pri Gefen. And they're going to be able to fulfill the obligation of kiddush with the elder guy. And afterwards, and he's going to go and he's going to now wash his hands, and then he's going to bless Amoti, and they're also going to be able to fulfill their obligation with him that way. Even though we just said that one who interrupts his bread meal in order to be able to do kiddush on a cup of wine, we said that he does not need to bless the blessing of Amoti lechem in heart because he's already in a bread meal. Mikol makom, nevertheless, Nevertheless, he needs to go back, he needs to wash his hands properly without the bracha of al nitzat yadayim before continuing eating the bread. And when you are returning back to your bread meal, and you want to go back and you want to drink wine during the bread meal, do not go back and bless the blessing of Borei Peri Gefen, like we mentioned earlier. Since you began eating the bread meal, and you also had wine in that bread meal before sunset, you had already blessed the blessing of Hamotzi. You blessed the blessing of Borei Peri Gefen, so therefore you don't have to go back and say them again when you're coming back after Kiddush. V'yesh omrim, and there are those that say, shekeshehu pores mapa ala pat umikadesh, whenever he is spreading the cover on the bread and he's doing the Kiddush, tzarich sheyeh lefanav lechem mishna, you have to make sure that you have in front of you double bread, 2 loaves of bread. Umi shaya be'emtza suda be'erev Shabbat, if somebody was in the middle of his bread meal on Erev Shabbat, meaning on Friday afternoon, and he needed to interrupt his meal and to do Kiddush because the sun set, but rather right now he doesn't have no wine, and now he has to go and he has to do the Kiddush on the bread. He's going to only say the Kiddush blessing. He's not going to say the blessing of Hamotzi at the time when he's doing the Kiddush on the bread. So Rabotai, that halacha, you have to remember, we've been speaking about this up to now. I don't want to be repetitive, but if you guys recall that if a person does not have wine, on Friday night you're not allowed to use any other alcoholic beverages. You must use bread. So in our particular situation, since you already said Hamotzi before sunset, and now sunset interrupts, you have to go to Kiddush. But do the Kiddush, but don't say the blessing of Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Rabotai, now we're going to move on to the next subject. What happens if a person heard Kiddush without the blessing of a gefen? Says Rav David Yosef, Shema Kiddush below birkat hagefen. You heard the Kiddush, but you didn't hear the person say the blessing of Borei Peri Gefen. He said it to himself. If somebody heard Kiddush from his friend, and he had kavanah to fulfill his obligation with the friend, and the friend also had kavanah in order to fulfill that person's obligation with the Kiddush, but rather what? He didn't hear the blessing of Borei Peri Gefen. We're going to tell you, you have fulfilled your obligation of the Kiddush. Because Kiddush you heard, you just didn't hear the blessing of Borei Peri Gefen. Says Rav David Yosef, and nevertheless, if afterwards you wanted to go and taste from the cup of the Kiddush, you need to bless the blessing of Borei Peri Gefen. What happens if a person made a mistake? Instead of saying Borei Peri Gefen, he said the blessing of Shahakol Yebedvaro on the cup of wine. And then he also said the blessing of the Kiddush. He fulfilled his obligation of the Kiddush. What happens if a person forgot to bless the blessing of Borei Peri Gefen on the cup of wine, and he only blessed the blessing of the Kiddush, and he remembered after he drank that he didn't say the blessing of Borei Peri Gefen? There are some rabbis want to learn you fulfilled your obligation for Kiddush. Some rabbis want to learn you he did not fulfill his obligation of the Kiddush, since he didn't say the blessing of Borei Peri Gefen. And halachically speaking, it seems, after the fact, since it already happened, don't go back and do Kiddush. Nevertheless, afterwards go and bless the blessing of Borei Peri Gefen on the cup of wine, and go back and drink from that cup of wine. Okay, Rabotai, That was the whole review. Now what we're going to do, we're going to go over the whole review in English with a review question and answer. And B'ezrat Hashem, after that, we will conclude. Okay. Review question and answer. Is it permitted to taste food or drink before Kiddush on Shabbat night, on Friday night? Answer, no. Chazal prohibited eating or drinking anything before Kiddush, even water. Question number 2. Does the same prohibition apply on Yom Tov and Shabbat morning? Yes. One may not eat or drink before Kiddush on Yom Tov or before Kiddush on Shabbat morning. Now remember, Rabotai, when we spoke about Kiddush Shabbat morning, all this is after you prayed the 18 prayer blessing. But before the 18 prayer blessing, you would be allowed to drink coffee, tea, or water. Question number 3. From when does the prohibition of tasting before Kiddush begin? Answer, from Shkid HaChama, from sunset, when the sun is no longer visible. Question number 4. If someone is extremely thirsty during Ben Hashmashot, which is twilight, may he drink water? Answer, yes, in the case of great thirst. Question number 5. If a person began eating before sunset, may he continue eating after sunset? Answer, no. Once sunset arrives, he must stop and may not continue eating or drinking until Kiddush. Question number 6. May someone eat shortly before sunset if he has not accepted Shabbat? Answer, yes. Even very close to sunset, it is permitted as long as he has not accepted Shabbat. We explained that the 30-minute rule does not apply to Friday night. Question number 7. What if a person accepted Shabbat by saying Bo'i Kalam, Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbat, or by praying Arvit? Is he allowed to eat or drink? Answer, he may no longer eat or drink even water. Question number 8. According to Sephardi custom, may a woman eat after lighting candles? Answer, yes, unless she intended to accept Shabbat with the candle lighting. She has to say it openly with her lips. Question number 9. According to Ashkenazi custom, may a woman eat after lighting candles? Answer, generally no, because candle lighting itself constitutes acceptance of Shabbat. If a woman who lit candles is thirsty, may she drink water? Answer, yes. Water and similarly tea or coffee are permitted. Question number 11. May one swallow medicine before Kiddush? Answer, yes, including a small amount of water needed to swallow it. Now, Rabotai, as we saw, that if you could wait after Kiddush, you should wait after Kiddush. If you cannot wait after Kiddush, we're going to tell you allowed to swallow the medicine, and if you need to have a little bit amount of water in order to make the medicine to go down easily, that's going to be permissible even before Kiddush. Question number 12. May one rinse his mouth before Kiddush? Answer, yes. Question number 13. May children eat before Kiddush? Answer, yes, when there is a need, such as hunger or thirst. Question number 14. Should children close to Bar Mitzvah age be trained not to eat before Kiddush? Answer, yes. Question number 15. May a person who did not make Kiddush Friday night drink water before Shacharit on Shabbat morning? Again, this is before he's going to pray the Shacharit prayer. Answer, yes. Before Shacharit, the obligation of daytime Kiddush has not yet taken effect. Question number 16. May one make Kiddush and eat before Arvit? Answer, yes, according to the basic law. If he begins more than half an hour before Tzat Kochavim, we're going to tell him he's allowed to. Question number 17. What is preferable if possible? Answer, to accept Shabbat and pray Arvit before making Kiddush and eating. If you guys remember, even though we said, according to the letter of the law, one is allowed to go ahead and do the Kiddush and begin his meal before praying Arevit of Shabbat, nevertheless, the preferable course of action is to accept Shabbat and pray Arevit before making Kiddush and eating. Question number 18. If sunset occurs during a Friday afternoon meal, what should he do? Answer, stop the meal, cover the bread, and make Kiddush over wine. Question number 19. If he was already drinking wine before Kiddush during that meal, does he recite Borei Pri Gefen again when he's making the Kiddush? Answer, no. All he's going to say is the Kiddush blessing. Question number 20. If he was eating bread before Kiddush and continues afterward, does he recite Hamotzi again? Answer, no. Question number 21. Must he wash his hands again before continuing to eat bread? Answer, yes, without a new bracha. Question number 22. If he resumes drinking wine during the meal after Kiddush, does he recite the Gefen again? Answer, no. Like we explained earlier, the reason being is because you already said Borei Pri Gefen prior to sunset during the meal. Question number 23. Should Lechem Mishnah be present when making Kiddush in the middle of such a meal? Answer, some authorities say yes. We're going to want you to have a double portion of bread when you're making the Kiddush. Question number 24. If he heard the Kiddush blessing but did not hear Borei Pri Gefen, did he fulfill Kiddush? Answer, yes. He fulfilled his obligation for Kiddush. Question number 25. If he wants to drink from the Kiddush cup afterward, what must he do? Answer, recite Borei Pri Gefen. Question number 26. If one mistakenly recited Sha'akol on the Kiddush wine, did he fulfill Kiddush? Answer, yes. Question number 27. If one forgot Borei Pri Gefen entirely and only recited the Kiddush blessing, what is the Halacha? Answer, bidavad, after the fact, he does not repeat Kiddush. He should recite Borei Pri Gefen afterward and drink from the cup. Rabotai, have a great day. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen ve'amen.